everyone. I am Sophie Silks. I am Coast Director of Strategic Engagement. This is our Ocean Innovation Hub. We opened in October and serve the blue economy community here in BC. So this is a place where you can co-work and have events like this. It's just for Coast members. So we're thrilled to have Pooja and the team here today. I'll pass it immediately over to begin doing some introductions. This is a wonderful panel. I've had the privilege of meeting with just once, but seeing, Leann and Alison in particular pretty often here in the hub and on our many calls and our co-hosting of the ABCMI Coast Innovation Forum, April 15th and 16th in Vancouver. Tickets available online, yeah. I was really inspired just by our first conversation, so without further ado, just going to pass it over to share a little bit about who you are and your role and where you're working now, and we'll go from there.
Okay. So my name is Leann Collins, and right now I'm the Director of Projects and Stakeholder Relations with the Association of British Columbia Marine Industries. And want to just introduce ourselves, or should I talk about my sort of leadership journey now?
Feel free, yeah.
Okay. So my leadership journey has really been based on diverse experiences that I've had working in both the private and the not-for-profit sector, and mostly in male-dominated industries. A lot of my experience was in the mining and oil and gas. So I've often been the only woman in the room and in camps. I've been very fortunate, though, to have really strong male mentors and leaders who supported me. And, even though with that, I realized early on, like sort of firsthand, that I would have to be an advocate for my own voice and expertise. And I would put myself in situations where I had the opportunity to learn and to grow. But my leadership story really starts a very long time ago. And if I go back to when I'm 15, and I took my first job in a fast food restaurant. And not only was I one of the youngest people, well, I was the youngest people, but I was also the only one who wasn't related to the manager, who was from India, and she worked there and hired all her family. But it didn't take very long before I earned their trust and gained more responsibility. And then that restaurant was taken over by a multinational firm. So when they came in, I got involved in some of the nuances and saw what went on behind the scenes. And even though I was offered an opportunity after high school to work with them in their office, just sort of having that experience to the corporate world really sort of solidified my desire to go to university. So I went to university, and then in 6 years at the University of Alberta, I got a Bachelor of Science degree and a Bachelor of Commerce degree. And then I went on to earn my MBA from the University of British Columbia. Almost immediately after that, I took a job as the marketing manager with an analytical lab. And unbeknownst to me at that time, and this was in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, so I went from Edmonton to Vancouver to St. John's. And unbeknownst to me, that lab was actually a division of a larger engineering firm. So I was able to carve out a role for myself in environmental consulting. And I had the opportunity to lead a lot of stakeholder consultation and government relations. And I was also the person who represented the organization to travel to international trade shows. I made my way back to Vancouver, and I was involved in the environmental assessment teams that did work on Canada's diamond mines. And I did a lot of stakeholder relations and consultations in Canada's northern communities. So I've worked across the country and a lot in the north. Sort of every step in my career really deepened my leadership experience. And what I realized is that, leadership isn't about titles. Leadership is about influence, adaptability, and creating opportunities for others. And so with that mindset, I undertook my next challenge, and that would be to work in helping to set up the Association of British Columbia Marine Industries. And that really meant that setting up a not-for-profit right from the ground up, I had to work with a very passionate board of directors who were all men, volunteer board of directors, and I had to really draw on my experience in the private sector and how business ran. And I had to, build a support team around me to help it grow. But fast forward almost 10 years later now, and the Association of British Columbia Marine Industries is a real, strong and valuable industry association in the ocean and marine space, British Columbia, and I would say nationally as well. And when I just think of one leadership moment that I think about often, and it was, I was sitting on a panel, and it was for a national project. And the candidate that I championed was neurodiverse and identified as such. But the panel, the other, my colleagues on the panel valued that individual the least. And so, there were 3 of us, so we had to come to a consensus. I really felt that it was that person had the most promise. So we agreed that if the number 1 choice didn't work out, we would then turn to this candidate. And luckily or unluckily, depending how you look at it, the first candidate did not work out for the job, so we hired the candidate that I championed. And at the end of the project, it was, the manager agreed that this was the best person that they had ever worked with. And so that really reinforced to me that leadership is about, looking beyond convention and really being an advocate for diverse perspectives. And that talent, you have to look at it in all its forms to bring home a team. So leadership is really about making an impact, and it's the journey that I'm still on today. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Alison Proctor. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Ocean Floor Geophysics. So we are a seafloor survey company who works internationally, and we also manufacture our own proprietary sensors, which we use in our services. I became the COO about 5 years ago. But my journey starts really back when I was in university. So I definitely took the road less traveled. I spent quite a bit of time in university. It took me about 12 years, but eventually I finished my PhD in mechanical engineering. And I had, during my time at the university, I not only developed a lot of specialized skills for working with robots and seafloor survey, but also I learned how to be a mentor and how to teach. And so when I got out into the corporate world, that was the way that I worked, was just to teach the things that I knew to other people. And so that just kind of naturally turned into leadership roles wherever in whatever projects I was on. And then I was very fortunate. I had, I think, 2 things that happened in my favor. One was that I was kind of right out of university hired into a company who really valued diverse opinions and perspectives. And so they were always looking for other ways of thinking and understood how that kind of played into more robust solutions to problems. And then also, my ability to kind of impart knowledge kind of really just turned into, a growth path for me as a leader. And then, as a growing company, the opportunities just presented themselves to me, which, I think there was definitely a lot of times where I had to recognize the opportunity for what it was. But I definitely been fortunate enough in my career to be surrounded by people who valued my opinion and valued the contribution that I was making. And in turn, I could see everyone else's contribution as well, and we've grown together. So, and that's how I got here.
Thank you, Alison.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kamila Calko. Founder of Sea Light and Sea Light Sisters. So Sea Light is an initiative I started to help bridge the gender gap in the maritime sector. Currently, representation of women sits at under 2%, and it has for decades. So our trend is not increasing. And I've also started Sea Light Sisters, which is a nonprofit which aims to support women already in the maritime industry with resources to help them navigate the complexities of a male-dominated industry, as well as offer support, whether that be counseling or legal aid or whatnot. So myself, I have been in the maritime industry going to sea for 20 years. I have worked up the ranks to be captain. So I was captain with the Canadian Coast Guard. I was also captain with BC Ferries. I did leave sea because I birthed a human and started my own business. As well, I also hold the distinction of being the first and only woman to complete the Pacific Pilotage Authority's familiarization program, which qualified me to write their exam. So that's to become a marine pilot on the West Coast here. And again, they're qualified for their exams, didn't sit them because they were scheduled for when I was 9 months pregnant, and it just didn't work out. But that's okay, because that's why Sea Light came to be. So how did I get here? Well, I came up from a bit of a rough and tumble background, and when I was 19, I decided to apply to be a tour boat captain in the Toronto Harbour. I'm from Toronto. I didn't have a lot of opportunity where I came from, and they were hiring university students to be ships captains, and I figured, well, if you're hiring them to do that, why can't I do that? And I had actually never been on the water in a kayak or boat. Nobody in my family went to sea, but I saw this as an opportunity to break out. And so they hired me, and I ended up being really good at navigating the Toronto Harbour and how crazy it can be, and ship handling and tour boats, and immediately I wanted bigger boats. So I ended up going to a Marine Institute to get a higher ticket, or a license we call it, for 4 years, and that enabled me to be sort of like an entry-level navigation officer, person in the wheelhouse anywhere in the world. I stayed local. I worked with the Coast Guard for 10 years. So I did 5 years on the Great Lakes, and then I came out west because ultimately I wanted to be that marine pilot. Also, my career involved working for BC Ferries in several capacities, including captain, as I mentioned. And some of my favorite highlights was also I took a swing at towing barges all over the West Coast. So I worked for a few different tugboat outfits, towing log barges, heavy crate, like very behemoth big things all over the coast, being the only one up in that bridge by myself. So I had a very rewarding career. And having said that, as I already said, the representation of women is very, very low, so I didn't encounter a lot of women on my journey. So I didn't have a lot of role models. And it was hard. There's a lot of things ingrained in the culture that makes it challenging. And there's also a very traditional notion of what leadership looks like. And I was not going to buy into that. So I was very lucky that throughout my career, I did have great allies who treated me like a person and saw my potential and talent and built me up that way, which gave me the confidence to keep going forward and showing up as myself, as opposed to trying to show up as somebody that I wasn't. So when we talk about leadership, no matter where you are, like management or just entry, like you are always a leader as long as you're supervising somebody. And when you're leading from authenticity, I think that is a very key ingredient, and integrity. Sometimes we walk into these cultures that we don't agree with, and it's going to be hard to go against it, but that is how you get your team on side, and that is what earns your reputation, I have found in my career. So I was lucky enough to stay in it long enough and work hard in it, and at the end, when I was captain with the first time with the Coast Guard, this was my shining milestone, I would say, because I got thrown onto a ship. I was 34 when I became captain, and I had a crew of 12. And generally, when you show up on these ships, you have a cohesive crew that's been there for a while. They know the systems, and you're just there to make sure like everything's going top notch. I got thrown on a ship where almost everybody was new. Some people had never been to sea. My whole bridge team, like I had been on that ship for 2 months prior. One person just came from ferries. The other person on my bridge team just graduated. The engine team just got his ticket as well. Like, it was wild. And so, it sounded like a nightmare, but it actually was a very unique opportunity because nobody knew what my style was. They didn't know what to expect. And I was like, okay, let's try running it a little differently. So I took all the things, when we think about captains, there were a lot of captains I did not agree with and didn't like, and some of them had some elements that I thought were very valuable. So I got to tie in a lot of that and sort of build my own style. And so my style was very humble right off the bat. I put I called everybody into the mess or like the crew room or whatnot, and I said, we've never worked together. Like, I'm pretty new in this position. We're not here to do magic. We're here to do our best. So take it easy. You don't need to try and prove something. Have each other's back. You all have strengths. I mean, someone just came from forestry. We all have something to offer to our team. Just because you haven't been in our industry doesn't mean we can't make this happen. And so we ended up having it was a 28-day trip. It was amazing. People really looked out after each other when people weren't doing so well. They had no problem coming up and saying so. I really valued building a team that had psychological safety. I wanted them to be okay, that if you're not doing okay, that's okay, let us know. Like, we can work with this. Your safety is paramount. That's where operations come from. Anyway, it all ended up being amazing just by telling them when I wasn't doing okay, if I needed more input. Sorry, I forgot you were here. I was so in my zone. That was the other thing. I was like, hey, one person had actually been there for a few years, so he had a lot to offer. And I was like, I am open to your input. Like, if you know how to do this better, please let me know, and I will exercise my authority to try and do that way. But yeah, and so at the end of it, they did this beautiful thing. They had made me a card. Like, didn't go buy a card. They bought construction paper, like cut things out, glued it together. Everybody signed it. And they all had said like, oh, like, your leadership style has been so refreshing. You had a lot of command and authority, but you really led with confidence, and you trained us, and you made us feel supported. And some of the people had said like, this is the best trip we've had in years. Like, that wasn't my goal. My goal was just to make sure we did it safely and to make sure everybody felt supported. But at the end of that, and I learned this much later, was creating that psychological safety creates teams that work very well together, and they're very high performing and innovative because they feel safe to explore things, try things. I can give you stories of like when they ended up trying things that they'd never done before, but we kind of had to, and it all went well. But they build trust, they build confidence. And so when I said at the beginning, we're not here to do magic, we're here to do our best. So we actually had magic that trip. And so I don't know how to wrap this one up, but it's so funny we were talking about this because the question for this prompt was, what is your leadership journey? And I'm like, I'm a leader? Like, I don't fit a template of what we think a leader is, but I led a team, and in a very different way. And what's also beautiful about that is those people have carried on their careers. Some of them have advanced to more leadership positions, and they all remember that, and they all know what it could look like, and they've embodied that and started disrupting sort of our idea of what leadership is at sea, and shifting the culture, which really needs to change. So, that's my leadership journey. Thank you.
Kamila. Wow. We are so fortunate to have the three of you with us today. It's such incredible expertise. I would love to talk. I'm hearing such amazing descriptions of your definitions of leadership, from adaptability and being humble to offering opportunities to others. I'd love to talk a little bit about the barriers that you may have encountered or that you're aware of within the industries. These could be systemic barriers to women advancing or achieving roles in leadership. And then we can talk a little bit about how to work through that. But does anybody want to kick that off? And again, it can be personal experience, can be observational. Maybe Alison?
Sure. So I think the thing that is most obvious to me, and I'm in a hiring position now, and I often see other organizations and who they're trying to hire, and I'm giving references, and now my personal experience is with the offshore industry. So We're often gone for 4 to 6 weeks, and several days sail to our survey site. And there are many organizations who still think that that is not for women, right? And I think it comes from two places. One, when you're offshore, you have, I had one of my colleagues who once said that, once the lines are thrown, you might as well be on the moon, right? Because you have what's on board, and that's it, and you have to figure out how to make things work and how to achieve your objective with what you have. And so there's often times where you have to, everyone has to dig in and, work together and do things that are not something you would just do in the office. And so there's a little bit of resistance. Well, maybe that's not for women, all right, that I still hear. But I think really the bigger one is the time away. So for sure, even in 2025, people still tell me that women can't be away from their families for that long, and which is, men do not get that same question, right? And it's really for each individual to plan their life the way they want to plan their life. And if your family is set up for you to be away for 6 weeks, then that's fine, right? But for sure, I still run into that where people think that it's hard for a woman to be away for 6 weeks, and so it can be really challenging to get your foot in the door, to get that experience where you get to go in the field and you get to participate in that, so that you can, learn the trade and work your way up into a leadership role if you can't get that opportunity, right? And so I think that's one of the biggest barriers that I see, is just getting that initial group that'll say yes, I'm willing to put you offshore in this position, so that you can gain experience and you can participate.
Changing the culture.
Yeah.
Right, of the organization. Just changing the culture of the organization, that otherwise, well, we're just going to discount women because they can't be a part of this job or whatever. And I was thinking, just related to that too, is in my experience, especially early on, I just didn't see other women in the room. And if there were other women, they were the ones that were just coming in to bring the coffee or whatever, right? There weren't really the women, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I'm just saying there weren't the women who were leading the discussions at the board table. And part of that, I think, is with the industries that don't have women in the operational roles to come up and be the leaders, just like you were saying, right? So frustrating.
And to build on that, that perpetuation of those stereotypes and biases. So even when you get in the door, those preconceived notions that inform others' behavior towards you, predominantly men, because you're probably by yourself, you end up having some of those more menial roles that a male counterpart wouldn't. You get more administrative stuff while the guys get more hands-on stuff or hard stuff, even though that's your job and administrative stuff isn't. Like, it's an automatic thing, and especially when you're starting out, there's such a huge power dynamic that you don't say no, you just do it. But it just you just end up getting stuck in that. And this is where loss of talent and opportunity happens, because you don't get to develop your potential, you don't get to develop your skills and demonstrate that, yeah, I can do the job, because right off the bat, you're being given lack of opportunity and filled with things that aren't your job description. Yeah, that's a huge one. And then the other one in industry that I really want to speak to is visibility or lack of, and this is in everything. It goes from language, like we talk about policies, regulations, whatnot. A lot of that language is outdated. No one's reviewed it or even thought about how it impacts anybody that's not a man. And then also, again, my references are at sea, but yeah, it's a male-dominated industry. It's a lot of guys. they don't understand. And you know what, even as, I can't speak for you, but it took me a lot of personal education to be like, why does language matter? Because a lot of the time guys are like, oh, it's just a word, like seaman, fireman. I'm like, it doesn't, because there's so many things that happen unconsciously. Automatically, you're like, you don't fit in there, you don't look like that, there's no place for you. It's a gendered occupation, you know? Like psychologically, very deeply, it gets ingrained. And so women don't even think about those fields. It like completely goes over your head because you're like, it's men. But that happens on such an unconscious level so early on. So like language is huge. We really have to start thinking about that. And then also material, when we put up, you know, posters or whatnot for trying to promote. Like I see it in institutions, like, you know, there'll be a job fair or whatnot. And I'm like, have you looked at your banners lately? Like, there's not a single female there or anybody else other than white men. Like, you really have to think about visibility and training. And then, yeah, and then like we said, there's not a lot of women. And then sometimes what happens is, you know, for the women that do make it to leadership positions, especially the ones before me, they may have had to subscribe. Actually, I know they had to subscribe to a very different time where it was harder. And so they may have adopted more stern, masculine traits. And so women coming in look at these women and feel like they can't hold a candle to them. They're like, oh, I'm never gonna make it because I'm not that person. And so I know when I started out, that was my case. I did have a woman captain, and she was very different from what she is as a person now that I know her. She's a fab human, but as a captain, she was very like stern, and you know, people didn't like her very much, and she was very hard on people. And so I actually started to role model myself after her, because I'm like, this is the only way I'm gonna make it. And somewhere on my journey, I was like, that can't be true, or else I'm going to have to leave, because I need to be authentic. And so visibility is a huge one in every facet. And then I always bring up the example of personal protection equipment, PPE. It's another reminder, like, you were not considered in this decision. Ships are being built right now where women are not being considered in shipbuilding processes. You know, there's still not adequate PPE for women, gloves, coveralls. It's a constant reminder, like, man's world, you don't belong here. We're not thinking about you. Just deal with it. So, yes.
Thanks, Kamila. You're starting to talk a little bit about influence, I think, and this has already come up. But when we think about how to begin moving beyond these barriers and maybe to start implementing or leading by example in a way that inspires the next generation of leaders, can you think of maybe some things you've seen, some interventions or strategies that were inspiring because they help move through this, or some that maybe you've used or that you'd love to use that the audience could learn from in their own careers?
I'm just thinking, you know, what you mentioned about posters for things. You know, just last year we were going to go to a trade show, one of the largest, you know, shipbuilding trade shows in Europe, and all of the advertising just showed men. Like, they just showed men at this conference, and I wrote them and I said, look, there's a lot of women who work in this industry, so just show us there, right? And so just, especially for younger women who are just looking out, like just starting their careers, when they look at stuff, they should be able to see women in any career path that they might be interested in that they don't even know about yet. They shouldn't be looking for women or see things and not see themselves. I just think that's so important.
I just want to say, just to round out what you just mentioned, sorry, and then we'll answer your next question. Yeah, when you don't show us, you're undermining our contribution. Simple as that, right? We worked so hard, and yet you still don't see us.
And I think there's actually an important component of that, is that we have to be willing to be seen, right? So we have to stand up and speak even when we might make a mistake, and so that other people can relate to us as leaders, right? And know that there is a path and it is possible, and you don't have to be perfect to get there. You don't have to be that really hard person. You just have to be yourself and find find your way.
And there's room for you.
That's
There
right.
is room for you like that.
So maybe on that, something that an employer can do is really support peer-to-peer groups for women. And, you know, I've been involved in some of those, and I didn't know what to expect at first. And I thought, you know, like, I'm not really someone who wants to get together and cry or whatever. So I was thinking, what's this going to be? But it was very constructive, because we're just sharing things and realizing that we have similar challenges. But what's really helpful is to hear how others get through them, because then you think, oh, okay, so that's been done before. I don't need to reinvent the wheel. So that, and I mean, I would think that that would be something relatively easy for an employer to support, right? Peer-to-peer training or peer-to-peer groups.
Maybe I'll ask about mentorship now a bit, something we were talking about before and I've heard mention of already. I don't know if you've been able to benefit from the type of mentorship that you would have loved to. Maybe you have, but when you think about designing kind of like the ideal structure, whether it's that peer-to-peer that's maybe explicitly not for crying unless you wanna, but you don't have to, not a prerequisite, whether it's, you know, sometimes it's mandated, like, okay, female to female mentorship, maybe that's not the way. I'm curious if there are structures you've experienced or ones that you would love to be able to implement that have been beneficial for you or would be.
Yes. So again, we know that yes, it's an asset to have women in leadership roles, and then for anyone coming in to gain experience and knowledge from that. I would love for it to be expanded, because, you know, in our industry, when we start separating, we do have to start paying attention about how to be more inclusive and think about ways that the shipboard and the marine industry is more welcoming, period, for everybody. But when we talk about mentorship, and again, for what like companies can do to overcome systemic barriers, is actually have mentorship programs for everybody. Like, sometimes when you separate women out, there's stigma involved. Women don't want to get involved. They're like, no, I can make it on my own, you know? Like, I'm tough enough to be here. And you're like, yeah, and it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that you're tough enough to be here. Like, let's get support, because we actually all need support. Everybody, the men and women, for how do we start shifting from these ways that can be harmful for everybody. So a mentorship program for everybody, because, you know, like I mentioned, I got lucky, but I also had great allies and mentors that were men. And so if there's a mentorship program that doesn't really discriminate, it's like, hey, we've got a captain or a chief officer or whatnot that wants to mentor somebody, and you've got someone that wants a mentor, pair them up, because it goes both ways, right? That person has a lot to offer for the competencies and whatnot, but they'll also be very informed, especially if they're paired up with a woman, about what the unique struggles and challenges are. Like, that's a great way to gain more awareness and start thinking about, like, oh, I thought I was doing a great job, and you are, and here's more things to think about. And same thing, if there's a female leader, like, pair them up with a male counterpart, because they get to learn a different style, a different way, different things to think about as they go through their journey. So I don't think it should just be, I mean, yes, there's a lot to gain from female to female networks. And something else that I think about when we talk about that, as I said, like, there are a lot of women in the industry that got to their place because they had to be a certain way. And just recently I was talking to women that are just entering the field, and, you know, they pair up with these women, and pretty much what they're given is a survival kit. They're like, here are gonna be your expectations, here are the norms, here's what you have to do. And that just keeps perpetuating the double standard, the extra expectations, the hard work, the culture that we're so trying to become aware of and break. So that's something I wanna raise about that. It's like, yeah, there's value in it, and there has been value for them to get to where they are, and that awareness that we can't just instill in the new people and the young people that this is the only way to do it, to survive. We want to thrive. Yeah?
Yeah, I think I've been lucky to have excellent mentors along my own journey. But I think the other thing is I try to, like, see mentorship everywhere. So, you know, every person I meet and all of the situations that I'm in, I think about them and how I can use the things that I've learned to, you know, improve my perspective. And so even I feel like there's lots of times where people have no idea how much they impacted me, either by doing something extremely negative or extremely positive, right? And I've been able to have significant life learning from that interaction.
I'm curious, I think something else I hear a lot about is imposter syndrome, and it's not coming up, but it's sort of the current that runs through a lot of what we're talking about. And something that I found to be really interesting as I build my own career is starting to have moments where I actually feel like a leader, or I let myself feel like a leader. And I'm curious if there are conditions or memories you have where you really started to feel like you were embodying leadership. I'd love to make a little space to celebrate yourselves a bit in your own leadership capacities. Yeah, if it's not a memory you have, just conditions that lead to, I don't know, feeling like you can feel like a leader. What does that for you? An easy one, a softball.
That's a hard one. Because I think as we go through these, I know as I go through, and I mentioned on that, is I never thought about myself as a leader. I did get to a place where I acknowledged my worth and my experience and my competence, and that I deserved to be there. But never in the frame of like a leader. I didn't realize I was a leader. I was. I didn't embody it that way. So I don't know if I have a specific memory. Like that story I shared at the beginning was definitely like the epitome of when it all came together for me. And throughout my career, as it was very, very challenging, I did almost leave the industry a couple times altogether. And I thought if I came back with higher certification and worked harder, it'd be easier. I'd be more equal. It worked to a certain extent, but it still wasn't quite easier. Yeah, I don't know. Again, I said like when those people validated my worth, it reminded me that I belonged here, and it gave me more confidence to show up in new places and just ascertain that and be like, I know what I'm doing. I am competent. So it really has to come from within, and finding that moment and not letting people sway you. Mm-hmm.
Well, I was just, in some ways, we all have these long stories and these long journeys, but it's not when you take a look back and maybe from a higher level that you realize you've been a leader in lots of instances almost from the beginning, because we're so busy, we get wrapped up in everything else. As people with busy lives, we don't just work, we don't just have our profession, but many of us have families, many of us are involved in everything that they're doing. So we've got so many hats that it's not until you step back and say, hey, I am the leader and I've done some amazing things. And one of the things, and I mentioned it, but when we were hiring for that job, we were all women, and I know we had biases towards looking at the candidates that were like us. And so, I really felt me championing that other individual. I had to think long and hard, and I made a real case to the others on the panel as to why this was the person that we needed to give a shot to, because they needed to look at things differently, right? And I felt really good about that afterwards. It took work and energy, but I felt like that was a good thing.
I guess I always feel a little bit like I am still an imposter as I move through life, and I'm taking on new challenges that I've never done this before. But I do have one memory where recently, within the last few years, I was given the task of doing reviews of people's continuing education plans. And I didn't know what I was doing, and so I started off I got into a meeting and I started it off with saying, well, I have no idea that I can't give you any feedback really, because you know your path, your career path, and so you just tell me what you want to do. And then we progressed through it, and I actually did have feedback, and I did have things to say that were relevant, that helped him and like identify his path. And he's like, you actually did have a lot to contribute. I know you started out saying you didn't have anything, but this was really helpful for me. And it was actually, that was maybe the first moment where I was like, huh, maybe I can do this. Maybe I do belong here, even though there are all of these things where I'm still learning. I do have something to contribute.
This can go on for a very long time. Yes. Yeah, and there's a lot to build on that, where we're like, we think we don't have something to offer because often we have internalized that we're holding ourselves to a higher standard, and maybe what we have to offer in that moment, we're like, oh, that's not good enough. And so sometimes we don't end up speaking and we're voiceless, whereas perhaps a male counterpart in the room, that would be completely enough, right? And so, yeah, we often, it's a long road of undervaluing what we have to offer, and that's again like very internalized in us, but it comes from the feedback we've been getting from a very, very, very young age, and especially when you're in a male-dominated industry, because sometimes it's as simple as you're spoken over, or like they literally do not hear what you're saying, and then someone else repeats it, a man, and then they're like, oh, that's a great idea, and you're like, I just said that. Like that is, I know we hear about it, we laugh, but it happens, and it's so mind-boggling, you know, so yeah, often we're made to feel like what we have to offer isn't as valuable, and so having that, you know, you got validated in that exchange, being like, oh, yeah, you know, you thought maybe it wasn't good enough, but it was, like you had enough to offer, so you have enough to offer, and it does take courage to sometimes speak up in those dynamics. I don't know if we answered your question about systemic barriers and what
you got into
leaders.
it. I didn't want to push too much,
Okay.
Just yet. But I do think it's helpful to name them sometimes because it helps folks who are maybe experiencing them without that language or without feeling like it's really happening. What you just shared, like, oh, you know, I say something and someone repeats it, and suddenly everyone loves that idea. Like we all giggle because it happens, as you say, all the time. But I don't know if if you'd like to talk a bit more about it, I do think naming them would be helpful.
Putting the work in to understand gender dynamics, I really think organizations have to do some homework and educate themselves and educate everybody at every level, right? Because if you have predominantly men at every level, they're just going to be learning behaviors and systems that they'll just take with them as they ascend positions. So really do the homework about what happens in gender dynamics, why there is that power imbalance, why we have these moments where we're actually literally not heard, or we're giving these menial jobs when we're perfectly competent to do the work. Because a lot of the time this happens unconsciously, right? A lot of unconscious biases, and they just get perpetuated in these cultures. So doing the homework, putting it out in training that's not online, in a group where people can self-identify, because again, it's usually not intentional. It's just so part of the day-to-day behaviors. I think that's a huge, huge step, giving that language. And then making it comfortable for people to have those awkward moments, because I know sometimes, you know, we get into these places where people get afraid to like say something. I'm like, oh, but now I'm incorrect or whatnot. So making it safe to slip up and make those mistakes and have those uncomfortable conversations and celebrate and support those people. And that goes in tandem, actually giving support to your managers for how to do that. Because a lot of times, you know, you're a manager, so you don't want to make a mistake. You don't want to be held like reprimanded for whatnot. So actually giving support for what that would look like. And again, I don't know that. That's not really my domain. But giving support for how to navigate, having these conversations, and then leading by example, you know, I think is huge.
I have a question related to this about accountability, which is something that we kind of glazed over, and it's hard. I can't think of really too many examples personally, so I'm curious if you can think of something to inspire us a bit about what accountability can look like in your careers and workplaces to kind of keep us all honest about this stuff. And I say us because, as we've been talking about, we perpetuate it too, inadvertently. So for self, for managers, for coworkers, are there any accountability strategies or tactics that we can learn from here?
Okay, that we've already seen
It's
in real
hard,
life?
Yeah.
One that we've seen in real life?
No,
or?
it can be something you'd love to see, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so hold someone accountable. So when, it's a tough one, right? Because there are some cases, especially in our industry, where people are choosing to be harmful and toxic and just dismissing these ideas. Like, I think ideally there would be, organizations aren't really holding those people accountable, so it shows that nothing happens to these people, especially when they're higher up, because we need them, the industry has a shortage, whatnot. So, yes, it would be wonderful to see, in my mind, and I think they have done it in some companies and shipping companies, is that when we have these managers that aren't actual leaders, a way to hold them accountable is to actually demote them, and depending if you're unionized or not unionized, can you do it or can you not? You can. I have seen it. It takes a process. As long as it's documented and it's been brought up, that's the other thing. Bring it up. We have this idea that, like, oh, nothing will get done, so nobody takes the work to, like, do the proper performance appraisals. They don't put in the paperwork to the office. But if there's a trail, people can actually get demoted. And that is huge for those people that think they are so powerful. And that sends a really good sign, I'd say.
So I haven't seen this myself, but I know that, income or bonuses or salaries can be tied to people, and that's one way to see accountability. Like I said, I haven't seen it myself, but I know that that's in practice what some people do.
I'm having a hard time like placing something around the word accountability. I think it has quite a number of contexts, but I think and you can hold individuals accountable for their own actions. But I think if you're thinking about it at the company level, I think it's really important that companies dedicate time and resources to training and education about what is actually, like, these things that we just do and that we just don't think about, right? It's no one's fault. It is just, this is what we've been taught for centuries. And how do we start bending that way of thinking? And the only way is to, like, start the conversation, and that requires time in people's workday, right? So I think companies really do need to engage in the process and not just send out a paper and say, read this on your own time and then change, right? Like, you have to actually, the company has to put time and resources into it.
Sorry, I just lost that thought. Where did it go? Yeah, so, and when we talk about accountability, also thinking about it like in a positive way is like celebrating the leaders in the organization that are upholding these wonderful standards and then highlighting that to everybody. And when we talk about what else can these organizations do when we, to sort of go through these systemic barriers and level the playing field, is actually meaningfully incorporate that as like a core value. Being like, if you work here, you align with our values, and our values are this. We want to be working towards greatness. We want to be better. We want to be ahead the curve. If you're working here, you buy into that, and you embody that, and you do that, and they offer you support for that, right? So actually, you're right, not just sending out a piece of paper, but actually being like, this is very important to our business, our organization, the way we want to move forward, and modeling that. And again, giving training, resources, because most of the time people don't know. Yeah.
Have any of you seen examples of leadership training in your careers? Something that I've thought of often, just like non-industry specific, like how can you be a great manager? How can you avoid being a terrible manager? I would love to hear any experiences that you've had with that type of learning, whether you've seen it or if you could design an ideal curriculum, what would be included? Yeah.
I don't have any firms specifically in industry. However, when I was going to become, when I was on my marine pilot journey, I knew I was going to be the first and only woman. And it's a company of around 120 men, and it has been since inception, right? So that was a lot of pressure, especially since I didn't grow up very, anyway, I had to learn a lot of mannerisms. I had to expand my vocabulary, etiquette, So I made a point to educate myself. So I did take an online course. This was through Cornell, Executive Women in Leadership, because I wanted to make sure when I sat at that table, I had also internalized tokenization, where I was like, I need to represent all women, and I need to speak for them all. That is a myth. You do not. You have to be yourself, and that again is put on you. So I took this course through Cornell because I was like, I really want to have the language, and I want to know how to speak properly, and I want to know how to negotiate because I'll be a stakeholder, And it was through that course, and this is I've been in the industry for 15 years now, where I learned a lot of the language. I learned that these dynamics are prevalent in all male-dominated industries. Women don't make it to the top. So it identified a lot of these things. It gave me the language. It taught me how to negotiate, all these things that we're not really socialized for, that men just naturally are. It's part of their upbringing versus our upbringing. So that really helped, but it also made me really angry, because when I was on my journey to become a marine pilot, and I thought I had to represent all women, at some point in a 5-year span, I had 10 employers, because I wanted to be able to do everything. And when I got there, I wanted to be untouchable. You can't say I can't do this job because I've done it all. Whereas there's plenty of men that don't have to do that. They just do a ferry run, 2 routes, good enough. But I knew that wasn't gonna be good enough for me. So through that course, I learned that that was a common thing. Women internalize having to be better, having to work harder. And I found that as a real asset, and that is what I try and share and educate with everybody and every woman I have a conversation with, because often we hear these things, we'll share a story, and we don't have a language to articulate, yeah, that is a dynamic, it's being studied, it's gender dynamics, they've been studying it for decades, just no one wants to tell us about it. So I think having that language is very important, and I just took it upon myself. It's kind of ironic. It's ironic the way I came about that course, and that's how Sea Light came to be, because now I need everybody to know.